What if you are the biggest reason that God is not answering your prayers? Hey, I'm Kyle Chastain from Aspire Church, and I want to take the next couple of minutes and talk to you about how to get out of your own way. A lot of times, God can't move in our life because we don't get out of the way. You know what the most powerful word in the English language is? It's I. I. When we have a me mentality and an I mentality, it's all about what can I get out of it. But when I put my personal preferences and my agenda to the side, that opens up doors for God to work in ways that were never possible before. For most of us, that takes a whole lot of discipline and a whole lot of work. And for most of us, it often takes something very painful to get to that point. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. When we don't get out of the way, we close the door for God to work in our life and in our situation in any meaningful way. You know, there's an interesting story about this in the New Testament, and it's pretty popular. You've probably heard it before. But Jesus uses the illustration of a little child, and I'm going to read it to you. It's out of Matthew chapter 18, and it's verses 2 to 4. It says, Jesus called a little child to him and put the child among them. Then he said, I tell you the truth. Unless you turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. So anyone who becomes as humble as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now, I've heard this used by a lot of preachers to talk about having childlike faith or having the faith of a child. The problem with that is that we often confuse childlike faith for childish faith. And there's a big difference between being childlike and being childish. Childish faith is stupid faith. Childish faith believes anything that it's told without asking questions. Childish faith lays down on the ground and throws its arms up and throws a tantrum when it doesn't get its way because it's childish, it's immature. And Jesus is in no way telling his followers, or telling us for that matter, to have childish faith, immature faith. Childlike faith, on the other hand, is very different. Have you ever noticed how a child is very open to pretty much anything? They'll go wherever you lead them. And they're very open to possibilities. It's why children have such incredible imaginations. It's because they don't say no. They just go with it. They're very open to possibilities. Well, the same thing is true for childlike faith. Childlike faith means that you're open to the possibilities and different ways of God to work. When you close yourself off to possibilities, we close off doors for God to work in our life. But here's the thing. You cannot have options without humility. Now check this out. Because whenever we talk about humility, we have to talk about its opposite, which is what? Pride. Now, pride has come to mean a lot of different things in the past few years, but I want to talk about pride from a classical sense, okay? Everybody likes a good classic, right? Pride from a classic sense means an overinflated sense of self-importance. You think you're better than somebody else. You think that your way is the only way, or that your way is the better way. But here's the thing. Pride doesn't have to be just about thinking that you're more important, or you're better, or your way is the only way. That's not the kind of pride that typically gets us in trouble. That's not the kind of pride that usually keeps God from working in our life. The kind of pride that I'm talking about is subtle pride. And it's subtle pride that kills. Subtle pride is the kind of pride that says, well, if I do it, is anybody ever really going to know? Subtle pride says, I don't want to take this job because my degree is for a better job, a higher job. Subtle pride says, I don't want to do what I need to do to get to where I want to be. That's the kind of pride that harms and kills us. That's the kind of pride that puts up a block in our life, and it keeps God from being able to work because it closes us off to other possibilities and other options. Pride makes you feel more right more justified, better, more righteous than you really are. Pride looks at the little picture and says, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this situation? How can I manipulate this situation to have the outcomes that I want? Have you ever prayed with pride before? Have you ever prayed and used your prayer to try to manipulate God to give you the outcome that you wanted? That's pride. And it affects all of us. But humility looks at the bigger picture. Humility says, maybe I don't know what's best. Maybe my way isn't the best way. Maybe it is. I don't know. But God, I'm going to be open to options. I'm going to be open to different ways of letting you work in my life. If you want to see God work in your life, if you want to see Him transform your relationships, whether it's with a spouse or with a friend or a parent, or maybe you want to see Him intervene in your financial situation, or maybe you want Him to help you go after a dream that you feel like He's given you, or maybe you just want to grow spiritually, you have to be able to set aside your pride and come in humility and get out of your own way. To do that, you have to set aside your personal agenda and your personal preferences so that God can have a little wiggle room to work in your life. Now, if you're like me, you're probably tempted to say, well, sure, I may have a little bit of pride, but can't God just work in spite of my pride? Sure, He can. But why would He? Because when He gives you options and when He gives you possibilities, your pride is not going to allow you to step into those possibilities. So no, He's probably not going to work in spite of your pride. Childlike faith is about being open to possibilities. So when you pray, set aside your pride. When you ask God to move in your life, make it a point to set aside your agenda so that you can open up possibilities for God to work in your life. And I'll tell you something. I'm going to be honest with you, all right? It's just me and you. It's a lot easier said than done. It's a lot easier to say, God, I want you to fix my marriage and my relationship. I want you to give my spouse and I more time together. It's a lot harder to say, God, I want you to give my spouse and I more time together, even if that time happens in a counselor's office. It's very easy to say, God, I want you to bless me with this better job where I can make more money so that I can get my finances right. It's a whole lot harder to say, God, I want you to help me in my finances and I'm going to get on a budget and I'm going to limit my spending so that I can get in the right place. It's a lot easier to talk about setting aside your agenda and your personal preferences than it is to actually do it. But it's 100% necessary to see God move in your life. Why? Because pride and personal agenda blocks God. Because it only allows us to see what we think is right and what we want, and it closes off our hearts to different options that God may want to give us. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, would you do me a favor? Take a second and share it on social media. And if you want more great content like this, you can check out our website, www.aspirechurch.org.